Hello, everybody. Cliff Smyth here. Just with a short presentation for your Felden for Life event on Feldenkrais research in the International Feldenkrais Federation. I'm sorry I can't be there live, but it would be 3 a.m. in the morning here in San Francisco when you are meeting. So I've made this recording for you. So here we go. So the agenda today is brief, just talking a little bit about the history of the IFF and research, talking about what research into the Feldenkrais method has been done so far, and then some thoughts and directions about Feldenkrais method and health. So this is me. I'm Cliff Smyth. I have a PhD in mind-body medicine, and I teach at the Saybrook University. It's a graduate school. I teach masters and PhD students. I teach in the Department of Mind-Body Medicine and in the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences there. And I teach classes like movement modalities for wellness. I have a history with the IFF. I was joined the board at the beginning of the IFF, was there for 12 years, including a couple of terms as president. I've been a member of the research working group since it started, but I'm on leave from that right now. And I'm the editor of the Research Journal, and I've been a practitioner for a while. So let's get into the content here. There we go, that's better. So right from the very beginning of the IFF, it was interested in promoting research, and in fact, it was written into the purposes of the IFF. And from the beginning, there was a portfolio on the board about research, and I had that portfolio when I was on the board. So the first project, really, in relation to research, was developing a database of publications about Feldenkrais method. Then in 1999, we started doing some work on kind of helping practitioners develop and kind of discovering more about what we do and what we can do better in the form of quality workshops and developing the competency profile. And that's also when the Feldenkrais Research Journal was founded. And sometime early in the thousands was when the working group was formed. So the working group one of their main projects has been the reference database, which it's maintained for a long time, and recently did a whole lot of additional work to upgrade it and update it. So it's a database not of research studies, but a database of everything that's been published about the Feldenkrais method, 1,152 items. But it's searchable. It's on this software Zotero, and what they did recently was to include tags, so it's easier to find a topic that you're interested in. Also, for articles that are about medicine and healthcare and those kinds of things, there's tags about the levels of evidence that the article represents. And then there are abstracts for a lot of the papers, and translations were done for the abstracts to make the material more accessible. Oops. Okay, so then the research working group does other things. Particularly, it organizes events, presentations of research so far, presentations of research studies, and there are videos of those events available. And they've been used also, for example, with translation and to introduce the research information to the Spanish-speaking community. There's a small budget for sending people to present at conferences or to have panels at conferences, scientific conferences. And then there's networking, finding out who has interest in research, who has knowledge, connecting people. You can see on the screen from the working group website invitation to an event that was discussing research methods in the Feldenkrais method. The other major project of the IFF around research has been the Research Journal. It's a scholarly journal for the professional field of Feldenkrais. So it's not like a scholarly journal for an academic field. So we're really publishing about the Feldenkrais method and using it as a way to promote the method, but also to come to understand the method and to discuss research and promote research. So there's been 7 volumes since 2004 with 90 articles, and we publish new research, particularly, pilot studies and new research from new researchers. There's also hypothesis and theory about the Feldenkrais method, reviews of the research done so far, discussion of research methods, and we also reprint some key articles that may be in other journals behind firewalls and things like that, and translations of articles. In fact, the whole of Volume 7 has been translated into Spanish. And there's also material in that volume in German and French, or coming, and even our first article in Chinese. So part of the focus of the journal is really to serve the community. So supporting new researchers, new authors, helping people write about the method in and about the questions of research and the new research studies. So it's quite well read. There were 7,500 article downloads last year at the rate of, therefore, about 630 per month. Here's a picture of what the journal looks like, Volume 7, the current volume. Good. So one question people often ask is, how many research studies have been done so far? And that depends on who's counting, what they're counting, and when they did the counting. So just to look at these systematic reviews I have, these reviews I have listed here. So Hillier and Worley, with some help from the IFF, did a systematic review of the effectiveness of Feldenkrais method in 2015. And they found 40 relevant publications, of which 18 were actual research studies. And 7 were of high quality and randomized controlled trials. Then Stevens and Hillier did a review looking at mechanisms of action and things like that, but they also added 7 more studies, including 2 more of high quality randomized controlled trials. Berland et al. In 2022 were looking at the usefulness of Feldenkrais for physical therapy practice as a physical therapy tool. They found 16 studies. And Martin, just recently in 24, looking at Feldenkrais method and clinical psychology, found 14 publications that they thought were relevant to psychology, including qualitative studies and other hypothesis and theory things, as well as research studies in relation to psychology. And then Nicholas Zollinger did a study supported by the Swiss Guild. And he did a scoping review of all the studies about motor functioning, about movement and related topics. Studies of all sizes and all qualities in the whole time that studies have been done. And he found 41 studies. And it's very useful to have that complete picture and see what was studied, what research methods they used, the risks of bias, all those kind of things for those studies. And then there's always new studies coming out, like the study from Georgie on fibromyalgia and her colleagues in 2023. So what's been researched so far? So first I have to say there's an English language bias here. that there may be studies not in those reviews that were published in German or Italian or French or Hebrew that that I don't have access to. So these are the topics that I've gathered from the papers that were in those reviews. So there's this whole category of movement and physical function, including studies of dexterity and grip, of balance in general, but particularly balance and mobility with older adults. And that's probably the biggest body of research we have is on that topic of balance and mobility with older adults. Then looking at certain disease conditions and their impacts, particularly quality of life and specific quality of life issues to do with things like stroke, MS, Parkinson's disease, arthritis, bruxism, and mild incontinence. And then there's a kind of category of psychophysical, perceptual, mind-body kinds of things like anxiety and mood, work-related stress, also a balanced confidence, because there's the ability to balance, but there's the confidence in one's balance. Body image perception, study of how that's related to eating disorders, for example. Studies of perceived effort and perceived comfort in the body, interoception, and particularly pain. Quite a few studies, including high-quality ones of pain, chronic low back pain, neck pain, and as I mentioned already, fibromyalgia, and also some studies of the measurable physiologic mechanisms of action. So if Feldenkrais affects muscular tonus, whether it creates changes in the nervous system, including the brain. Some of these studies are higher quality, some not so high quality, but those are the kinds of topics, health-related topics that have been researched. So if we look at the limitations of the studies so far, then the study sizes tend to be small, and there's a lot of pilot studies and proof of concept studies. There's a lot of variability in the designs, how much intervention, how many functional integration sessions or awareness through movement classes, what research methods we use, what things were measured. So there's quite a lot of different things that we measured, as you heard from the topics. And then there's different qualities. So there's a few randomized controlled trials that I mentioned. And then there's some trials that are controlled but not randomized, etc. Others are just simple pre-test, post-test studies. A lot of this research is done within the community, so there's potential bias. And I want to say, I have my master's and PhD students, they write literature reviews about things like qigong or breathing practices or mindfulness or whatever, and yoga, and these are the things that they say about all the studies that they're writing about, that they're small, that there's a lot of difference in the designs, the quality is variable, partly because of the funding and institutional support and expertise that's available for studying these mind-body somatic movement practices compared to pharmaceutical trials. So this is common for many areas of health and wellness interventions that don't have the kind of support that the pharmaceutical industry has or the surgical instrument industry has. So these are things that need to be addressed. And we always have this ongoing question, as we should, about what's most important to study and what's the best way to study it. So some obvious responses to this, of course, are that we should try and find ways to have bigger studies, maybe more multi-site studies, maybe more studies across countries. And there would be value in creating more consistency in some of the designs in terms of interventions, in terms of maybe having some standardized protocols of the lessons that are taught in programs, and maybe more consistency in measures, or doing replication studies where we do studies with the same measures. And they could be ways that we could move forward with the research. They're obvious first places to go. Good. So now I have a few thoughts that are more my own, but coming from working in the field of mind-body medicine. One thing is, I think sometimes people think that there's a separation between health and healthcare and learning modalities. But in fact, we know now, like, learning contributes to health. Like, learning is protective with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, right? There's that level. Also, so many helpful programs, so particularly for chronic conditions like chronic pain and stress and those kinds of things, include a learning component, include a psychosocial education as part of the process. And I think psychophysical education, that would be one way of describing Feldenkrais, it really fits quite well in the learning within the health and well-being sector. Another thing is that the mind-body unity, or the relationship between mind and body, between the physical and the mental, is really well established now with research. We see it in neuroscience. You know, people do a meditation intervention, it shows up differently in blood flow in the brain. The immune system, there's a whole field of psychoneuroimmunology. The cardiac stuff, how the heart rate, blood pressure, heart rate variability, which is quite measurable. And we might think of using as a tool for measuring how we impact people's health and well-being. The respiratory system, breathing practices, and for us, of course, we know a lot about the musculoskeletal system. We know that mental things, imagery, suggestion, like in autogenics, the kinds of things we do in encouraging people to move in particular ways with less effort, those kinds of things are really quite well established. And importantly, those kinds of things have been shown to be important in chronic conditions, that interventions, activities, programs that for stress and anxiety and sleep disturbance and chronic pain and mood disorders often make use of these mind-body practices that we know influence and make use of the mind-body relationship, or the mental and the physical. And parallel to that, then there's a lot of evidence that somatic and mind-body practices can produce helpful physiological change in those chronic conditions. So yoga, Qigong particularly, have a large amount of research, and also mindfulness. And many people who are not familiar with mindfulness meditation might think of it just as a still and mental process. But in fact, there's quite a strong somatic component in Buddhist mindfulness meditation practice, and in how it's come to the West. For example, in the MBSR, the Mind-Body Stress Reduction Program, then it includes elements of body scan, of walking meditation, of awareness of the body, of awareness of breathing in the body. So there are, somatic components in a lot of the mind-body interventions, not to mention, other Western somatic practices like Alexander technique that that can produce positive changes. So that's a kind of framing of how I think about this Feldenkrais in health. So then there's some specific things within Feldenkrais method, some factors that we use that can contribute to health. So we promote attitudes and skills in self-care, right through the lessons. We're encouraging people to find ways to take care of themselves and develop a self-caring attitude. Also, in the mind-body field, attention and learning how to control and work with one's attention is shown to be a really helpful skill, and being able to become absorbed in your own experience in hypnosis, in meditation, in the flow states, that can be really helpful for promoting health. I've talked about the mindfulness and awareness component. Then interoception and body awareness and bodily self-awareness are, again, things that Feldenkrais method arguably promotes and have been shown to contribute to health. And then a sense of calming in clinical practice and also in my own qualitative research. Many clients and students of the method talked about this experience of calming, that we're not necessarily setting out to promote relaxation per se in Feldenkrais method, and yet there's this mind-body experience of calming that many people report. So another specific thing about Feldenkrais method is this emphasis on excessive muscular effort, more effort than's needed for the task, and background muscular tension. And there's actually a word for that, dyskinesis. And that is associated with many chronic conditions and medically unexplained symptoms. Going back to research from the 50s and the 70s on biofeedback, for example, surface electromyography. And there are new tools for testing for muscle tension that don't involve needles. So that gives us some more options for research. But muscular tension is associated with stress. Everybody talks about blood pressure and heart rate variability and those kinds of things. But many people experience stress or anxiety as muscular tension. So I think there's ways in which we can be helping in that way with stress. And then excessive muscular effort affects inflammation. So there may be ways in which we can be researching the method for health in relation to these very specific things that we think of as important parts of the method. Some studies, so Feldenkrais, doing self-movement with self-awareness, I think many people would argue develops self-efficacy and a sense of the health locus of control, that there are things that you can do for your health, and coherence. These are all concepts in medicine. Coherence, which is a sense that you can do things for yourself and it's worth doing things for yourself. So we could measure for this. There's been some studies that have measured for self-efficacy, I think, in the health locus of control. These are things that we could measure for. Because Feldenkrais method has a functional orientation about the functional outcomes, helping people do things in their lives, then the possibility exists for us not necessarily to do a randomized controlled trial for every health condition. That might be useful, but it's also possible to think in terms of research and practice of Feldenkrais being used for people dealing with different or multiple health conditions, focused on what kind of functional outcomes are we seeking, or are they seeking? So in a study by Connors and colleagues in Australia, they used a patient-specific functional outcome scale. That is, the clients chose what functional outcomes they wanted. Maybe it was getting out of bed without pain. Maybe it was running 5 kilometers. And then they assessed the level of success on that functional outcome scale. So there may be ways that we can capture how we help people with function with different health conditions and different wellness goals. And then my final thought for today is about Feldenkrais in the clinic or in the healthcare program. So I know in Europe, I think there's been many cases where practitioners have been in clinics, primary care clinics, and specialist rehabilitation clinics. I know here at Stanford there was a practitioner in the clinic there for people with multiple diagnoses, and so and then we could look at what's the impact of embedding them in a clinic or a program. You could compare clinics and programs, ones with Feldenkrais practitioners, and you could use a realist evaluation approach, which is to identify what things you think the Feldenkrais practitioner or program would impact. And then even if it's in a setting where there's multiple inputs and the what is done using Feldenkrais, in functional integration or in the selections of classes may be manualized, may be quite different, but you can look at the impact of having Feldenkrais practitioner or Feldenkrais program in the clinic, in the institution, in relation to the overall outcomes, although there'll be other outcomes as well, but you choose specific ones that you think having Feldenkrais there might influence. So anyway, there's some of my thoughts from reading the literature and practicing and thinking about research over many years, and I probably have more. But that's it for today. This is how you can contact me, and thank you for listening and having me as part of your program. Okay. Bye.